All right, this is One Last Midnight. Welcome back to Learning How to Program in C#, a beginner's course. Now, if you haven't already, go back and watch the overview and the basic concept lessons. The overview, we covered just, what's going to be in the course and how I'm approaching the course. And then the basic concepts was getting the IDE up and running all the way to starting the first console application. In today's lesson, we're going to focus on variables. We're also going to look at data types, and we're going to look at some more console methods that we haven't quite touched yet, which are read line and read key. And then we're going to look at naming conventions, because this is very important when you're coding or you're learning how to be a coder, at least a good coder. And then we're going to do a recap, and then I've got another challenge for you. And hopefully you did the challenge from the last lesson. So what is a variable? In the very, very most simplistic terms, a variable is a container to store stuff. So think of a basket. The basket is your container, and the stuff you want to store are apples. So that is, in the most simplest terms, a variable. But let's look at it a little bit more. Let's go deeper into the term of variable. A variable is a name given to a storage area that is used to store values of various data types. Okay, so let's break that down. So go back to the basket analogy. The basket is the name, that is the storage area, and the apples are the data type. Now, what's a data type? Right? We need to look at data types. We need to kind of get a general high level understanding of what a data type is. It just indicates the kind of values that is going to be stored. So if you look at this table, you can see various different data type names and the ranges of those specific data types. The one that's important to us right now is the string data type, which is 3 from the bottom. So let's go back to the variable and look at it again from a different perspective. Let's look at the basket. We've given the basket a name. We're calling our variable, now we're calling it basket. Before we had name, now we're calling it basket. And our basket is equal to, in quotation marks, I'm looking at the camera to make sure I got my quotation marks set, in quotation marks, apples, because that is a string of apples that we're putting into our basket. So finally, what would it look like if I wrote this out in C#? And here it is, with the definition of variable. A variable is a name, in blue, basket, given to the storage area used to store a value, or apples in green, of a various data type, string in orange, or gold, whatever that is. So this is how we'd actually write it in C#. We'd say, hey, look, I've got a variable. It's of type string. It's going to be called basket, and it's equal to apples. Okay, that's pretty simple, right? So that's variables in a nutshell, because that's what we're going to use in the next part of the coding. Now, I gave you a challenge in the last lesson, and that was to see if you could extend our basic program. Could you write to the console the game title, the description, your author, and copyright information? Because that's what we focused on in the last lesson. And look, guys, if you guys aren't doing this, if you're not following along, doing these challenges, doing these lessons, you're not going to learn. So get to it, get coding. Don't be scared of it. Do the lessons, do the challenges. If you haven't already, fire up Visual Studio. When Visual Studio loads up, our console project, the one that we called Console Trivia Game, is going to be in the most recently used applications. Click that and it'll open up. So I wound up putting in my title, which I called my game Trivia Master, the Harry Potter edition. I put in a description of the game, which is, welcome to the ultimate Harry Potter trivia game. You can challenge yourself, blah, 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 blah. And then I put in, it was created by me, and the copyright information. That's where you guys should be at as well. Before we go too much further, I want to fix a problem. So if you run this console application, on the bottom of this console application, after our lines print out, you'll see that there is a block of data here that says, hey, you just got done compiling, and to close this window, hit any key. That is the debugger and the IDE taking care of one step for you, which you should be taking care of yourself. So we're going to fix this problem right now. So we're going to follow what it says here. We're going to go to Tools, Options, Debugging, Tools, Options, Debugging, and we're just going to type in Automatic. And there's a checkbox here that says automatically close the console when debugging stops. We want to check that and click OK. Now, if I close my console application and I run this again, what's going to happen is the game's going to run and it's going to close immediately. That's because we are not handling the exit properly. So I want you to go ahead and add 2 lines. Well, I want you to enter 2 blank lines, and then I want you to type console read key. We're going to close it off with some parens and a semicolon to end that line of code. What read key does, and if you hover over it, it'll give you a description of it. But what it does is it waits for the user to press a key and then do something. In this case, we're not going to do anything. So the application is just going to leave. This is the last line of code. And so when we hit that key, it's just going to close. Now the key is irrelevant. It just wants you to hit a key on the keyboard because we're not trapping the key. We're not evaluating the key. We're not doing anything with whatever the user is doing at this point other than letting the application end. So once it gets to this line, it'll wait for a user to input. And then after that, done. Application is done. So let's test that. My application is up and running. And there you see the cursor blinking, waiting for us to do something. And if we hit any key, it will close as expected. Perfect. Okay, so now we're handling exiting the application ourselves. This is important because we want to be able to do something at the end of the application. Let's say they finish all of their trivia questions. We want to put in congratulations, here's your score, and then press a key to close the application, right? So we want to make sure we're handling this ourselves, and now we are. Our purpose here was variables. And so if you remember back to the basket equals apples analogy, we have some lines here that hopefully you did in the challenge that we're going to turn into variables. Now, this in and of itself, writing the lines out like this is not the worst thing on the planet to do. Sometimes you do this, but it's better to put them into a variable. We know that these are strings, so it's very easy for us to determine what variable type this is going to be. So we're going to type in string, which is our variable data type. And then we want to give this a name. So I want title. And for right now, just for example purposes, I'm just going to close this off. So that's the end of the line. You're going to see a green squiggly there. That green squiggly actually is telling you the variable is declared, but it is never used. And this is great for new users because the application, the IDE Visual Studio, is telling you, hey man, you've got some garbage code here because you haven't used it, and either get rid of it or do something with it, which is great for a new user. So the squiggly line, the squiggly green line is telling us, hey, look, we haven't used this variable yet. So we want to add in the description. That is going to be our next variable. It's also going to be a string. And then finally, we want to put in a string for author. And we want to put in a string for copyright. So now we have the 4 strings that we're going to use. But how do you use them? You need to, while you have, this is called declaring a variable. You know, putting in the type, putting in the name is called declaring the variable. But we haven't set a value for these variables. So if we actually tried to use this variable right now, and you can do that by doing console write line and then putting in the variable name, and closing it off with a semicolon, you're going to get a red squiggly line. And the red squiggly line is going to say use of an unassigned variable, which means we haven't put any data in this, right? We haven't initialized the variable. We've declared the variable, and you can see that the green squiggly is gone because we're actually using it now. We've declared the variable, but we haven't put anything inside of it. So it's not even going to let us run the application. If I was to run the application, what would happen is right down here in the output window, it would tell me that I have an error. Matter of fact, let's run it. First of all, it tells me, hey, there is a build with errors. Do I want to run the last successful build? Nah, let's not do that. And it's going to come back and it's going to tell me in the error list, hey, look, you've got a problem here. And if I click on this or double click on this, it'll take me directly to the line where I have the problem. We can't run this application because this variable has not been initialized. So we need to initialize it, which means we need to put a value in here. So it doesn't really matter how you initialize this variable, whether you do it with double quotation marks or whether you type in string empty. What we really want to do is we want to take this value out of here and put it into this string. So here's our title. Now we don't need it in this right line anymore. Matter of fact, as you can see, we already took care of writing out what our title was going to be by referencing the variable. This variable contains this data now. There's no reason to have this line anymore. Now, why are variables needed? Why is it so powerful? What if I wanted to actually change this title? For some reason, I print out the title and now I want to either add to the title or I want to completely change the value of the title. Well, let's say we wanted to add to the title. So we'll just copy this line above here so we don't have to do a bunch of typing. We'll just copy that line, and we haven't dealt with concatenation, which is adding two strings together. And you do that with a plus symbol. Very simply, just put in a plus symbol and then you can start adding in another string. And I can just put in Harry Potter, let's say it says Trivia Master Harry Potter Edition. I want to give a space dash version 2. And now if I run the application, let's comment this line out. We haven't dealt with comments, but comments are a way to remove a line of code from your application or to give information to your application. I want to introduce this to you now because we're going to be using it much more later. You can just do that with the double slash right now. It's the same thing as me just deleting this whole line, but I don't have to, if I want it back, I don't have to retype it back in. I just get rid of these two slashes. Okay, so if we run the application now, what do you think we should see? Well, I think what we're going to see is title, this Trivia Master dash Harry Potter Edition, and we're also going to see another dash version 2. Let's test it out. Bingo. It worked exactly how we expected it to work. So you can see here that I was adding to this variable by putting in some additional string value. But what if I wanted to change it? Let's take this line, copy it again, and say variable of title, I want you now to be equal Harry Potter Master Edition. And at the end of that, we're going to put in a semicolon to end the line of code. And let's put in version 1 on the end of this. So right here, we declared the title, we set it to the value, we initialized it with this initial value. Here, we printed it out and we augmented it a little bit by adding version 2 on there. Now I've completely changed the title and I've reprinted it out with the version 1. So what I expect to see are 2 lines of the title with slight variation to it, if this works correctly, which it will. So here we go. I see the Trivia Master Harry Potter Edition dash version 2, and then you can see where we changed the variable and now it equals Harry Potter Master Edition version 1. As you know from the data types, this does not only work with strings, it also works with numbers. So let's say I want to add 2 variables of an integer type together. I want another integer that says age 2. And I'm just going to add a value of, I don't know. Let's add a value of 20. So if I was to say age plus age 2, what do you expect the result to be? I have an idea, but what do you think it is? So let's run the application and find out. It's 21. And why is it 21? Well, it's 21 because it took age 2 and it added it to age 1. So this is a simple addition. You can absolutely do calculations with number-based variables, whether it be an integer or a decimal or float value. You can do all kinds of calculations inside of code to achieve a different value, like if you were building a calculator application. So user input 1, user input 2 equals whatever the sum of those are, if they did a plus or multiplication or whatever the value is going to be. I hope you understand because it's pretty simple at this point. So again, a variable stores a value at the most simplest level, right? Container equals stuff. So off camera, I took the time to copy the remaining strings from these write line statements and put them each into their own individual variables. Now you see a couple little extra things on here, and let me just quickly cover it. The concatenation of environment new line is just adding an additional carriage return into the string. And the description was long. And if you put in a long description as a single long line, you can just hit enter and Visual Studio will add in the concatenation character so you can have a nice little formatted area and it looks great. I also added in some additional carriage return line feeds to this particular string because I wanted it to format correctly when it displayed. And then finally, at the end of the description, I added another carriage return line so that I can have this separated. And when you run it, it looks like this. It's nice and spaced out. The title is all by itself with that carriage return line feed. Then the description, which is formatted somewhat nicely. And then another carriage return line feed. And then it has my created by and copyright information sitting right here. And this is how you use variables. You know, there are coding standards and naming conventions in all programming languages. And this is to help make your application more readable, your code a lot cleaner, easier to understand, and sometimes it's absolutely expected by the company that you work for. Sometimes actually enforce it with another application that goes and checks your code to make sure you're following their standard. Coding and naming conventions, here's a list of how you should be using the notations in particular instances of a object or even in with some methods. And so here's a guideline. And what we're focused on right now is just the local variables. And it says camel case. And what the heck is camel case? The notation for variables and objects goes way back to C++, and Hungarian notation is something that they do where they define the data type before their variable. And the way that they do that is they put, like in a case of a string, they put str, and then you can see I have crazy monkey. And crazy and monkey are both capitalized. The Pascal case is an instance where you have if you had crazy monkey, both of these names would be capitalized. And if you go back to the last slide, you can see where Pascal case is actually being used. And in the case of our variable, we're using camel case where the first word is lowercase and then all subsequent words are uppercase. In my example, you can see crazy is lowercase and monkey is capitalized. I'm only going to lightly touch on this, but this is something that we're going to be using on a regular basis. Quite often as I code, you're going to see me using the specific cases that are needed, and I'll even mention them. This is just to make you a better coder. Start following them now. Print out that screen that I had, keep it close by, because when you're writing code, you need to know exactly how you should be using these naming conventions and these coding standards. Okay, so a recap for you. Variables. What is a variable? Data types. What is a data type? You guys should know this already. We covered it. The new console methods, what were they? I actually said we were going to do 2. We only did 1. Which one was it? Naming conventions. Why are they needed? Now I have another challenge for you. And that is, see if you can make our little application cooler. You know, look at the console namespace. Type in your code window, the code editor, console dot, and then see what comes up. There's a little dialog that comes up and you can click, I believe it's the blue wrench that shows you the methods. Click on that blue wrench and read through some of those methods and see if you can't make our application cooler. Like, can you change the text color? Can you change the background color of the application? Can you possibly put in ASCII art as your title and your description of your application? Something, right? See if you can make it cooler. So that's the challenge that I'm giving for you guys for the next lesson. Let's see how you do. All right, that was it for me. That was it for this lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button. If you're not subscribers, please subscribe. If you want to follow me on any of my social media, you can find the links in the description below. And make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you know when I post new videos or go live. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.